at Convergence Insight. If you're wondering what session you dialed into, this is reducing the vulnerability of your surveillance systems from a cyber attack. Pretty topical given all that we've seen going out there in the world today. But in general, as you know, the surveillance systems that we have been installing and as an integrator for are much more than cameras and recorders. The systems now leverage the IT infrastructure and their integrated components as part of an IT ecosystem. If you dial in on Thursday, on the 20th, you're going to hear from a keynote speaker, John N. Stewart, who used to be the Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cisco for many years. And he's going to dive even more into how topical this is today and how interdependent both the security system and the IT systems are, and why it's important to pay attention to cybersecurity. Anyway, joining me today, I have Brian Lipscomb, who's the manager of advanced cybersecurity and Convergent Technologies. Also, Wayne Doris, one of our product partners representatives. He's the business development manager for cyber solutions at Axis Communications. And I think you all are aware of what Axis does and the cameras and other things that they work, but they're a close partner of ours. And also Eric Prescott, who's a technical operations manager for cybersecurity in one of our largest regions in Convergent. So first thing I want to say before we even get started is ask questions as you go along. So as something piques your interest, pop a question in, and we may get to it right when you put it in there, or we may get to it at the end. But either way, throw your questions out there as they come up. We'll get to it either in this session, or we'll get back to you later if you tell us who you are. And for sure, when you put your question in, just put something about who you are in there, either your name or where you live or what company you're working for, so we can make it a little bit more personal as we go through this. So first of all, just to cut to the chase, today we're not going to talk about cybersecurity of an IT system or the base network that companies have their laptops and things like that riding on them. We're going to specifically talk about the cybersecurity of physical security systems and how it relates to protecting that base network from cyber attacks. So it'll be interesting as we go through that today, because the experts we have are going to tell you why it's important. But let's just talk about the why for a second. I think we've all seen a significant increase in cyber attacks to companies, especially since the onset of COVID. More recently, with Colonial Pipeline, it all became real to those like me that live on the East Coast of the United States of how important cybersecurity can be to everyone, not just the companies impacted. And then for the security industry, we saw a significant a cyber issue related to one of the security companies out there called Verkada, and how information that was stored related to the cameras systems for many companies, including Tesla and others, were hacked into. And then you can go back further in time and see where systems like IoT or OT systems were used to enter the base network of a company for either a ransomware attack or something worse like denial of service. In either case, significant things that we should be paying attention to now. And we, Convergent as the security integrator, have brought together this team today and several of our other presentations throughout Insight to talk about this very, very important topic. So in most cases, we think of the IT system as being taken care of by the IT department, and that's absolutely true. So as I said, today we're going to focus more on the security of the security system. We call it security of security. We're going to talk about the device level. We're going to talk about how that applies to the enterprise system that device is on. And we're going to talk about it from the life cycle perspective. In other words, not just when you get it, but how do you maintain it and keep it cyber secure for the life of that product. Now, I mentioned before that the world has changed in security over time. We moved away from analog and coaxial cables to digital cameras with IP addresses that are much like laptop computers. And we're going to talk today about increasing our awareness to how important it is to apply the same basic cybersecurity requirements to those systems and devices that the IT department would apply to laptop computers and the rest, and why it's important to do that to protect not just the security system, but the base network from an attack. So with that said, I'm going to remind everyone again, let's do this. ask questions as you go along. Ask a question even before, if you have one related to cybersecurity and your physical security system. Pop it in the question bank right now so that we can see it and tailor our presentation to it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over now to Brian Lipscomb. Again, remember, Brian is the manager of Advanced Cyber Solutions and Convergent Technologies, and he'll take us through some pretty interesting thoughts and discussions, and he'll lead an interactive discussion with both Wayne and Eric going forward. Brian Lipscomb, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate that. As Kevin mentioned, we have joining with us today Wayne Doris from Axis and Eric Prescott from our Northeast region. And we thought it was important to bring a couple of subject matter experts in on this for the purposes of discussing cybersecurity from the manufacturer's perspective and the integrator's perspective. So that way we're approaching it with some balance to give some practical how it actually gets implemented into the client environment. And it's important for us to address and discuss that primarily the systems that we install are placed in a hybrid environment of equipment that's provided by Convergent Technologies and equipment that's provided by the client. And in most cases, the compute infrastructure and the storage infrastructure are client provided systems. And so we won't spend a lot of time today talking about the IT infrastructure and things that are hardening of those systems, because that typically falls in the responsibility matrix of the IT department. What we really do want to talk about today is device level hardening capabilities and system level hardening capabilities, because those are things that we can actually control and do in your environment to provide higher levels of security to those systems. So as I mentioned, we think about the the security system ecosystem as a composition of three things: your IT environment, the device level, and the system level being the video management system. And so we'll just give four key things that we recommend as best practices to discuss with your IT departments as hardening standards and guidelines before we transition into focusing really on the device level hardening capabilities and the system level capabilities as well. So from a network management perspective, we always recommend placing your security system on a VLAN to provide separation from the production environment, just as an additional level of security. And this is a pretty common strategy, but something that we do recommend deploying on every system that is installed. We also recommend that if there's an Active Directory database that is able to be integrated into, that is accomplished as part of the deployment. So that just provides an additional level of user authentication. And then subsequent to that, two-factor authentication systems or multi-factor authentication systems, if those are available, always apply those to the servers and workstations there. And then most organizations have additional network monitoring tools that are available on the production environment IT system. And if those solutions and security controls are available to be deployed on the security system network, those are always welcome additions to the security system platform. And once your IT department, and we can work with your IT department to affect those changes, once those things are done, then what we really focus on as an integrator and as the manufacturers is how do you take and harden those endpoints, the cameras that are at the end of the line on the outside of our buildings. How do we make sure that those devices are locked down as tightly as possible? And then what are the capabilities between the device and the system to improve security so that those endpoints are not used as a vector of the attack for bad actors? And then finally, once the system is deployed, how do we ensure that those systems stay in a ready state or stay as defensible as possible throughout their life cycle? So that's the progression that we'll take in this conversation today. And I'd like to invite in Eric and Wayne now for some discussion on starting with the device level security practices. And Eric, one of the things that is often asked of us is the IT department has a set of policies that are specific to IT systems. How do we take those policies that are designed so specifically for IT systems and may not be exactly designed for the operational technology environment or the surveillance network? How do we apply those policies in that operational technology environment?
Well, thanks for that question, Brian. It's a great question. Deploying new systems or adding devices to a client's environment involves a few key steps. First, we need to understand the customer's IT policies. Then we would need to bridge those policies to an OT environment. Often the customer will have policies surrounding corporate issued computers that may not be germane to the OT environment. If you take an IP surveillance camera, which is, when you think about it, just a computer with a lens, policy written for a corporate laptop may not be the correct policy for securing an IP camera.
So if it's not a one-to-one policy to endpoint device in the surveillance network, how would you apply or interpret those policies to be applicable to the surveillance system, for example?
Sure, we would take the policies given to us, interpret them, and apply them to the OT environment. For instance, there may be policies that call for two-factor authentication to gain access to computers on the network. 2FA could be applied to the video management system server, but wouldn't work with an IP camera.
So at the device level, as that is what we're really talking about right now, and the endpoint will be specifically to a camera system. If you were to take a look at the anatomy of a camera, the technical anatomy of a camera, how would you take that device and at just within its device level, make that device more secure and protect it from being a vector for an attack?
I always recommend a few things, upgrading device firmware, applying long, complex passwords, disabling unused services, anything that you don't 100% need for video to be transmitted across the network to the network video recorder. The thing about this, though, is all three of those can be tricky to deploy if done by unexperienced personnel.
And most of the product partners that we work with at some level create hardening guides or best practices for securing an IT operational technology and IT environment. And sometimes they're 10-step process and sometimes they're 80-page documents. How does Convergent Technologies interpret those manufacturer hardening guides, extrapolate as what's needed from them, and apply them in a real world scenario as we deploy those utilize those hardening guides while we're deploying a system in a customer environment?
The manufacturer hardening guides are a great resource in understanding the specific treatments that could be applied to harden a manufacturer's device. We use them to understand what to do and how to do it. But you've got to look at the system as a whole and understand, will those treatments work within the environment, and will they work with the system you're deploying them with? So
a lot of times we're asked to apply cybersecurity because it meets a compliance standard, or there's a checklist from an IT department that says do these things. And the hardening guides feel a little bit like compliance, right? They're check boxes, they're things that are best practices. My question, I guess, is, are the hardening guides from the manufacturers enough to provide true security? And how far do they go to affecting true security of that device?
Well, they're a good start, but they're only one component to a secure system. They give you the roadmap to secure the specific manufacturer's device. As an example, an IP camera hardening guide may recommend enabling HTTPS, a protocol that encrypts traffic across the network. But that hardening guide doesn't speak to the overall, or how the overall system will interact with that protocol, or how to configure the system to take advantage of that secure protocol.
Okay, that's great. And so, Wayne, we've been talking about device hardening from an integrator's perspective. How does the product partner community look at it from at the device level? What would you say in supplement to what Eric has shared?
Well, like Eric indicated, they're a good starting point. Us as a manufacturer, we want to make sure these are all the different security controls that you could enable or use on the device. But the problem that I've seen, and I've seen customers do this, where they'll just take the hardening guide, implement everything, and then call back and go, oh, hey, this thing doesn't work. Yeah, no doubt. Now you've totally secured your camera, but now it doesn't talk to your VMS, or your VMS can't see it, those kinds of things, or it doesn't integrate with another system. So that's why it has to be carefully planned out with what are the goals of the organization to secure. Are we securing encrypting data in transit, data at rest, and again, fit into those other aspects that the system's asking for, whether it's Active Directory, certificates, et cetera. But that's the whole point. It's a guide to say, okay, yes, if we want to deploy certificates or HTTPS, this device can handle it, and it handles certificates of this length or whatever, right? So the biggest thing is it's just a reference guide, and just use it as that, but also work it together with the IT policy that you're trying to bridge or work with.
Might I interpret that as saying that if you used every manufacturer's hardening guide to the letter of the law, nothing would work together? So it's about finding that balance point between security and operability. Correct.
And what is the risk that the organization is really trying to work against, and what are the actual threats for the particular system that the customer has? Sure.
So, Eric, when we're doing an installation and we have these hardening guides and we have recommendations and policies, how do we blend all of those things together to install a secure yet functioning system?
Well, the first step of the process is to require that the recommendations made by the manufacturer are part of the customer specification. End users really drive demand by requiring them within the spec during the RFP process, excuse me. We can ask what process tools are used to perform system hardening and additional security enhancements. And we can require auditing checklists and/or reports that validate that the requirements have been met.
So within the industry, within Convergint, there are some auditing tools that are available. How do you help report out that cybersecurity has been implemented within a surveillance system that you've deployed?
Well, we at Convergint have a tool called iTrack that we can use to provide a client report on what steps were taken to apply cybersecurity to a device or system.
Okay, so it's something that we can evidence to a customer that certain steps have been taken and formally report out if there's part of a compliance audit or checklist.
Absolutely, we can print out a PDF that shows what we've done step by step.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. So I think that covers a bit of the device level security and what the opportunities are. There's some best practices inside that environment. If we could, let's transition a little bit to the system level, where we're taking those devices and integrating with the other devices and making it work in a multi-product partner ecosystem. It's not just the VMS and the camera. There are network switches and recorders and computers and all these things that are part of that environment. When you, Wayne, as a product partner, look at these things, there's a whole interoperability thing that we just discussed a few minutes ago. You have got all these capabilities of the systems to harden them. How do you ensure there's operability between the device, the system, the network, and that with that interoperability, we can still implement cybersecurity controls within that environment?
Right. Well, it all starts with choosing the right partners and vetting the correct product partners. And that's very important based on the goals that the end customer wants to have for cybersecurity. You can't put things in if it isn't already there with the product that you're selecting, or it's very difficult. Usually it can get bolted on afterwards, but it's going to cost more and it may be more difficult. The other thing is, as most of your top tier manufacturers will already have great working relationships with a set of other ecosystem partners. And with that, it's important because there are usually entire teams that are working together with that partner. And so R&D teams will be collaborating together. They will know roadmaps of this is where we're going. not only with products and features, but also with, hey, our API is going to make a change. We're going to let you know ahead of time so that you can avoid having systems that don't interconnect and work together. And I think that's an important part. And also giving partners the ability to get prototypes ahead of time, particularly if it's a new feature or something that may be rather different. The last thing that the customer wants is to go, oh, hey, great, there's this great camera. Oh, I put it on my system. It doesn't work yet with the system and things of that nature. But more importantly to this discussion is how are vulnerabilities, either say with an API or an SDK, or also just product vulnerabilities in general. Doesn't matter which product or which vendor you select, we're going to have vulnerabilities that come up. And that's why patching firmware on a regular schedule is key and critical. But do understand that when you start working with an integrated environment of whether it's a video management system, an access control system, you'll get into where there's these leveling or versioning, right, that you can get into. If I upgrade my version on the camera, it may not work with the VMS, or I have to upgrade the VMS in order to get cameras that work at a higher firmware level that may have security patches that I need. And that brings me into another discussion, which is test labs or off-production environments. In critical infrastructure and government work, usually we'll see you have as a requirement to go put all your products in there to get tested for integration. I think each customer kind of needs to replicate that and work with the manufacturers, the integrator that they're working with, and also replicate that process, because you'll also get to figure out, hey, if we upgrade this, we had a problem, and understand as a manufacturer, we can't vet every integration and topology that represents on the customer network. So I'm a big fan of test labs and having an off-production environment. And this kind of leads us into also securing APIs. Sometimes this can get overlooked. Most of these APIs or SDKs will require either root access or administrative access, and these are privileged accounts. And that's why it's very important to keep the passwords on those very secure, a good length, but also understand that, I see commonplace where it's the same password for everything, on the system. If you do that, just be very wary of who has that password, and particularly if it's in a VMS or something, ensure that it's encrypted at rest and also encrypted in transit, right? And also sometimes in HTTPS, make sure that you may set that up for, say, web browser, but you may miss it depending on the API. Ensure that it's also going to use that encryption for that as well, because it's certainly easy for an attacker. You could have encryption for a user logging in, but then sniffing the traffic of this integration, and it goes, oh, hey, here's a admin or a root level password for me.
So if I were to kind of repackage what you were saying, is that as a manufacturer, you have teams that work on interoperability between the systems, that you make sure that when you turn on the security at the device level, it operates properly with the VMS or the head-end system, so that there's device level encryption between the server and the device. And then when you get to that server, the accounts within that server need to be secured, need to be authenticated, need to have the same security controls as standard IT policy. And that'll kind of, that completes the loop from user to endpoint device. And you guys work with the top tier manufacturers, not just Axis, but all of the top tier industry partners work together to create that kind of circle of security.
Correct. And again, it's not only secure communications between devices, it's password, account management. Understand that when the attacker, say, comes in on a camera endpoint, he's immediately going to look for an aggregation point, i.e. a VMS, an access control system. He really wants to get the system administrator or the network administrator for that machine, so that he can get privilege escalation and move on, and not have to have that kind of account, so he can get into more parts of the network, right? The other thing about these aggregation points is this is your chance. This is where you can effectively add two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, Active Directory, hooking into a bigger trust structure, outside of just between the devices and the, say, the VMS.
One thing that we often say is that the VMS or access control system, for that matter, aren't usually the target of the attack, but they're the vector of the attack. So they're always on, they're highly available, and they're adjacent to the other production environments. And so the attackers use them to gain access to other systems, not necessarily just be in the VMS. Doesn't have as much value as the production environment.
Yeah, and one thing to also watch out for, a lot of times I'll hear, well, our physical security system, our surveillance system is on a parallel network or an air-gapped network or another network. Inevitably, at some point, there is a workstation somewhere with dual NIC cards, two different networks, and understand that those are bridging points, and that if you want to do that, a lot of time that's done for when we get into lifecycle management for, it's easier for me to go out and check on this network because I can get to the internet to see if there's a patch. Right. But understand those bridging points, if you do that method, is extremely where you've bridged these two networks together.
Kind of bypasses some of the security controls you put in place to prevent that. So yeah, that's a great point. So there are multiple parties involved in the process of implementing cybersecurity or security controls on the security system. From your perspective, what are the roles of each party to ensure that at the product partner level, the integrator level, the client level, how do all those pieces work together to deliver a secure system at the end of the deployment?
Well, this is, again, you can leverage professional services of each organization is a huge help in implementing that. Again, that can help keep in the event that your integrator may need some help, particularly if you're doing some more advanced functions on devices like certificates or certificate management and those kinds of things. It can be very helpful with that.
And at the product partner level, security does have to be baked in. So I think we've covered that the higher end manufacturer, top tier manufacturers have those controls baked in. There's some additional higher end security things that you're just kind of alluding to, such as certificate management. How does that play a role? What is certificate management, and how does it play a role in providing security of the surveillance system?
Yeah, certificates are primarily used for authentication, understanding whether it's a user or a device to the network, and they're the primary mechanism for encryption, or also keeping those communication lines from being sniffed or understanding the data that's going back and forth. And usually an end customer's organization already has a trust structure for certificates in place. I get this question a lot because a lot of devices will have a self-signed certificate, and the first question we get when we're working with a enterprise customer is, "Oh, we don't want to use that certificate." And we go, "Correct, that's not the certificate we intended for you to use either. We would rather you use your CA certificate or certificate authority on your trust structure." The self-signed certificate is there in the event that you're on a network that doesn't have your trust structure yet. Maybe it's a pre-production or where you're prepping devices to go onto your client's network. You still want to use encryption there, and you may not have all the trust structure there, and that's what self-signed certificates were for. And again, like I said, for the authentication part, that's how you trust what devices that you're enrolling onto the network. And between the various systems that are in the physical security system, whether that's the VMS or an access control system, what you may have. The important thing to understand is that certificates, they're just like driver's licenses, right? So, or passports. It has an expiration date. And so it's great once you get this set up, but understand that these certificates will expire because you don't want this device to be on your network forever. You want it to say every year or every 2 years, I want to check and make sure that, yes, this is still the correct device. This is still valid. And that also gives you the control that in the event that somebody had taken a device or something you could revoke that certificate. And so then if it does show back up on your network, it's not gaining access. And so if that's not managed well over time, then you can get into an area where, oh, we have 10,000 cameras, we put certificates on them, somebody forgot to, certificates expired, and now all of a sudden it doesn't work with my VMS system. So that's why it's critical that if you do deploy those mechanisms, ensure that you have the capabilities for managing those certificates, and that's where working with Active Directory or other things that already exist in IT for certificate management are a huge help.
That's great. And I think what we're trying to suss out here is that there are a lot of different capabilities inside the security environment. So many controls. I think we've pointed out that we could actually make a device completely inoperable by tightening it down so much. And we have end-to-end encryption. We have the device level. We have the system level. There are opportunities to implement cybersecurity within that operational environment. The challenge that I think we have as an industry is translating that to the customer side and the integrator side and blending all those things together. So Eric, from your perspective, how can the integrator help move this forward into the conversation with the clients and start taking these capabilities and really making them part of standard deployment practices?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. The integrator can help by educating the customers about the cybersecurity capabilities of the devices and systems. They also can recommend partners that are known to have cybersecurity built right into their ecosystems. They can also train their technicians on best practices and obtain industry certifications, such as the recently released Security Industry Cybersecurity Certification by SIA. From the customer's end, they can help facilitate the conversation between IT and Convergint to apply their policies to the security system to the best extent possible. They also can incorporate cybersecurity requirements into the specification for new project deployments. They can also, help by keeping their systems up to date with a program to change their passwords on a regular basis. It's so important to rotate passwords. Also keeping their software and their firmware updated with the latest security patches for devices and applications. The software is really important, keeping it up to date as well. Going back to what Wayne was saying, you could get into that situation where, you want to upgrade the firmware of the IP camera, but the software hasn't been upgraded in a long time, and you can get yourself in trouble there. So, having a program to update those two in concert with each other is really important.
So when you sit with us on our Cybersecurity Supply Chain Council, and we have these conversations on a monthly basis, and I sometimes I feel that from the product partner perspective, you look at the integration community, Convergint, and our clients, and say, why aren't you deploying the tools that we've given you to affect better cybersecurity as a standard? These are really important standards. So Eric mentioned a few things about his recommendations about how we drive this through to actually have them become part of best practices and standard deployment practices. What is your perspective on how do we move the conversation from optional to prerequisites and standards?
Well, again, it comes down to the communication between, the actual end customer, the integrator that's going to be working the system, and the manufacturer. And, we all have resources dedicated to cybersecurity that can help, move things in that direction and understand the capabilities that are there that should be taken advantage of. And oftentimes we see this, from both the integrator and the manufacturer perspective, where sometimes it's an internal battle between either facilities and not wanting to involve IT or IT security. There may be some things there, but at the end of the day, the sooner the better that you can get those departments involved, the more holistic your security program is going to be. And at the end of the day, IT may have other tools and mechanisms to help make the life easier for upkeep, and particularly for life cycle. And at the end of the day, it's really about establishing, once you go through this process of bridging IT policies and what controls you can do with a video surveillance system with cameras in your VMS, establish that as a baseline and have that as a document to go, and then you can just work from there. I think if more companies said, hey, just like we have an IT policy, if we're going to put whether it's a mobile device or a laptop, go ahead and have this policy to say, oh, this is a physical security system. Here's the things I know that I want to do to do that. That pre-work would be hugely valuable.
And as a supplement to that, Wayne, one follow-on question: how can the customers understand how to drive those requirements? Can they look at the product partners, manufacturers, hardening guides, and incorporate them into their specifications? How can the customer also participate in driving this process?
Yeah, I mean, we would like to see, where we had whatever security controls they were going to implement into the RFP. Sometimes end customers are not willing or wanting to do that because they don't want to say these are the security controls that we're actually leveraging. But there needs to be a process of, once you've selected a vendor for manufacturers and an integrator, you do need to have that sit down afterwards and get that vetted out and understand the time component that it's going to take. But it takes the end customer driving it. And of course, we see from compliance or regulation, we just saw a draft where the White House has issued an executive order. All of this is leading to there needs to be a better baseline for devices and having these capabilities worked out off the get-go.
That's perfect. I think you're absolutely right on that. It's going to takes all of us to educate it and raise the level. And sometimes these events provide us an opportunity, things like the pipeline attack, to provide us an opportunity to evaluate our baselines and adjust them to be a little bit more secure. So we've touched on the device level security. We touched upon enterprise system security across the entire surveillance system. Let's spend a couple minutes talking about lifecycle management. What do you do with that system once it's deployed, and how do you keep it in a ready state and a cyber secure state? And from our perspective, we've evaluated how our manufacturers provide cybersecurity updates and how we can implement them. And we believe that the most effective way to implement a lifecycle management process in your system is to incorporate a password and patch management program, so that on a regular basis, the IoT devices that are installed in your system are being treated and having their passwords rotated, and frequently having the software and firmware updated on those devices. Just like your smartphone, when the operating system is updated on that smartphone, it provides you with fixes to bugs and glitches in the system. It gives you new feature updates and new capabilities within the device and system. But it also patches the vulnerabilities that have been discovered in the software or the firmware after the point that it was initially written. So when we regularly perform those services on a system, we can actually reduce the risk of compromise of that device or of that system by as much as 80%. And it's a very simple, cost-effective, easy way for us to provide a very large reduction in risk at a very small expense. So, and the way that we recommend doing that is by starting the budgeting process early. As technology becomes obsolete or it reaches end of life and they don't have security baked into those devices any longer, those systems any longer, we need to have a plan in place for long-term budgeting and to make sure that we keep technology refreshed and up to date. But also there's a little bit of a transition in our industry that we've been seeing over the past few years, where we typically have been a very capital expenditure intensive industry, where it was all about buying new systems and replacing and expanding systems. We're transitioning a bit more to an operational expense model, where more services and more things that need to be done in terms of a password and patch management program or security controls or managed services are being applied to the security environment. So we're seeing a transition of capital expense being moved into operational expense budgets. And we're also seeing a transition where the IT departments are opening up some of their budgets to help with the operating expense of the security systems and applications to affect things like password and patch management programs, because they're so important to the IT department to help shore up the devices. And they're recognizing, this is a big recognition, there was security was being applied up to the servers and up to the operating systems of those servers by the IT department in most cases. And what we're seeing now is the awareness that the endpoints and the supporting infrastructures for the camera systems and access control systems, et cetera, are also have cybersecurity vulnerabilities. The cameras themselves, the panels, the readers, all those parts that are beyond the server have been recognized as also requiring security. And so the IT department is now encouraging and helping facilitate those conversations and participating more in applying cybersecurity to those devices. So just recommend working closely with your IT departments, leveraging their experience and potentially leveraging their budgets as well. Sometimes that helps offset some of the operating expenses. And we know that every organization has their own cybersecurity standards, and it's our goal just to help you implement the highest level of cybersecurity that's appropriate for your organization, according to your policies, according to the best capabilities of the device, the system, and the entire ecosystem. So thank you very much. I will transition here back to Kevin to close out and start the Q&A process.
Well, holy cow, Brian, you gave me a task of summarizing. So I won't summarize 40 minutes in just 2. I'll just kind of hit a few quick high points, and then we'll get right to Q&As. So we learned a heck of a lot. I think the goal of the session was for participants to understand not just the threat. I think we know the threat's real. We've seen what's happened out there, and we know this threat is real, and we know the risk is real. And I think what you've laid out, though, is a little bit of how to dissect that problem and way to get after it by sharing from both the Convergint integrator's perspective and the product partner perspective that, we have to get at 3 things. The device level, we have to get at how do we make sure that the things we're putting in the system don't add risk, but they actually reduce vulnerabilities. At the enterprise or system level, we have to look at how that fits in with each of the other things that are attached to it. One camera is not the only thing you're worried about. You're worried about how it fits into that entire, we call it the customer's environment. And then you talked about life cycle. We have to understand how this fits, how you then, whatever you did to protect that system, that you maintain it for the life cycle of the system. So that's my quick summary, Brian, and I think we want to dive into some questions now, and we got some pretty good ones. So the first one is from Hubert, and Hubert asked, a real cutting question. Why does it take a big cybersecurity incident to have to get everyone's attention? That these threats are real. And is it that cybersecurity is defensive and doesn't make money? It costs money. And then, what's the best way to alert the stakeholders that have to make these hard decisions with our customers or that are controlling environments so that they're aware of this vulnerability and that there's a path forward? So a lot in that question, Brian. I'll turn it over to you to address with the team.
Well, thanks, Kevin and Hubert. That's a great question. It's almost a head scratcher as to why, right? We know. Sometimes I liken it to exercise. We all know it's good best practice to exercise, but we don't often do it, and it takes a life-changing event for us to take our health seriously. But Wayne, I think I'll ask you to maybe break down the first part of that question is, why does it take an event like this to have people's awareness raised?
Well, I think that all too late. Again, I think physical security as a whole over time has always been lower on the priority list, at least as far as budgeting. I think they're alluding to a part that, that's part of it. And I think particularly when we look at we had a manufacturer, a cloud manufacturer that had a breach. I think what was real important there is people are going to take a different look because they didn't expect, oh, hey, this is my production floor camera that somebody can see. I have a critical process that's critical to my business. Or even just a lot of times they just think, well, it's just my parking lot, it's my lobby. What's the big deal about that? But I think you're going to see where people are going to say, you know what, my physical security, my access control system, my VMS system, my cameras are not business critical. I can operate a business without them in many cases, but it is sensitive data and I don't need to have this exposure. But unfortunately, sometimes we've seen not only just in physical security in these aspects, but it's amazing after the fact. We've seen many evidence of, look at the city of Baltimore after the ransomware attack, spending, $80-100 million to actually, if they had budgeted for doing those improvements earlier, probably would not have been breached. So it's trying to get them to get that sense of urgency to say, hey, you've already accepted this risk. You have these systems, but you need to take corrective action immediately.
And Heward, I'll supplement that by saying that I've been in the industry a long time, and Kevin mentioned this earlier in his in the opening, where talked about transitioning from analog systems to digital systems. And if you rewind 15 years ago, and we started installing more digital systems, I don't think there was as much awareness that the devices and systems we were installing were vulnerabilities. We just saw them as a camera that was going on the wall, and then we began to understand over the years that they are becoming more they're becoming that they are a vulnerability. And so there's a level of awareness that just had to happen to get us to a point where once you have the awareness and education, then you and a few events that occur, it kind of all comes to the point where more customers are now taking this seriously, because there's so many case studies now. It's a known entity, and it's not something that people can bury their head in the sand and say, oh, our camera system or our access control system are not part of what makes our organization's IT infrastructure vulnerable. So hopefully that helps you in that. And the best way to convince stakeholders, I think, just to supplement that, finish out answering your question, is case studies. There are breach analyses that say the average cost of a breach is X number of millions of dollars. There are a few different out there. I think the average is 3.8 million. And it's really educating your peers and your leadership teams and stakeholder groups to what the real risk is and what the financial implications of not taking it seriously are. And Convergint and Axis, we and many of our product partners, we can help you articulate that to your stakeholder groups as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, that's you guys did a great job on that. Next question we have comes from Marcelo. He's in Brazil. And the real question is, what would you say is the most important component that you should protect in this whole system, right? The security system that we install has many components, right? We have servers, we have switches, we have cameras, we have access controls. Is there a critical node there? Is there something, what he's asking, is there one thing that's more important than the rest?
That is a great question. I will ask, hey, Eric, could you maybe address the component level portion of that question?
Sure. I mean, if we're talking about what's most important, if we're talking about the device level, we just want to make sure that we're patching those and applying good password management. Like I had said before, long, complex passwords. For me, I don't think there's any one component of the system, though, that is more important than the other. They're really all important, right? We need to address all of them.
One weak link in the chain equals
right.
a compromise. So, Wayne, would you have anything to supplement that response?
Yeah, your defense is the accumulation of all of these devices and the security that you do. Obviously, I think as long as the biggest thing is, do you have a policy and are you implementing controls for it and keeping things updated? But also, probably more critical is how monitoring of the network, right? That to me, because that's going to let you know, oh, hey, we had this packet come in. Looks like it's creating havoc over here. We got to be able to track that down. Monitoring of your devices. The other thing I would say is, I don't think I've walked into a job yet where they say, you know what, we know every device that's on our network. Inevitably, they give you a topology, and what they think they know and what is actually there, are usually two different things. So a lot of it comes down, your risk is you're not knowing everything that's there and how to apply that. And there are, platforms and technologies that can help you with that. But again, it's the summation of all of these parts working together. And a lot of it's the people process, ensuring, that security is talking with IT and talking with, your CyberSOC or whatever.
Yeah, I would say I was gonna add that both of your answers were perfect, and the supplemental component that's not listed in that list there is people, right? We have a people side of this, that training and security awareness training for our people and how to use systems and how to administer systems, audit them, and access them are an equal component to the technology.
Yeah, I call them the human firewall, and that's probably the more critical part of it, because we could set everything up, have all of these controls, have everything tight, but if somebody clicks on the wrong thing or inadvertently does the wrong thing, it's all kind of out the window.
Yeah. So Marcelo, hopefully that answered your question. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Brian. I think it absolutely did. And I think that, if I were to add one thing to what you just said, I see these always in three bins. You mentioned, we're talking about technology here when we started this out. Technology is a key component for cybersecurity. People's is another key component, as we just heard. And think about insider threats if you want to really understand the people threat, at the highest end. And then the third component is the process. It's the processes that are used in your environment, and whether those be processes for upkeep of your systems or just other processes of how you manage who has access to what things. So a lot in the process side, and I go back to what Eric was mentioning, is it's not one single thing. It's looking at the whole picture, and each customer environment's a little bit different, but you don't have to spend a tremendous amount of money on technology to solve this, but you do have to look at it in this way and ask these hard questions. So one question we got, it's a relatively specific one, Brian, and it's how is the UL cybersecurity certification for an individual camera, or I'd say for any individual component or device, how important is that?
Well, that's a great question, and I will maybe Wayne. I'll have you answer it first, and then I'll supplement your answer, because we've discussed this many times in our supply chain cybersecurity supply chain council. So over to you, Wayne.
Yeah, the UL 2900 is a cybersecurity standard. It's a rather newer standard. What's interesting is that if you decided that I like what this vets and what this certification provides, just understand that currently, because it's not well adopted throughout our industry, I haven't had a lot of customers asking for it, that you're going to be pretty limited on which manufacturers you can use, and even within the manufacturer, which specific models you could use. But also understand that it's just like any other standard. You could say ISO 27001. There's some recent, NC and NIST standards. Just understand it's a guideline. It's a good process. I have nothing against the UL 2900 process. They're looking at it's basically doing like code analysis, having a pen test, and you don't necessarily need a standard to dictate to an organization. You could have all of these things separately, but just understand that if you're going to do UL 2900, you'd want to apply that at the system level and not just to a specific device. Doing it to a specific device may not be inherently as great as you think for your overall cybersecurity protection and strategy.
Sure. So Caleb asked this question to us a few minutes ago, and I was thinking about it. I was also thinking about the framework of our discussion today. We talked about device level security, we talked about system level security, and lifecycle management. So if I would add one thing to what you just said, I would say that the UL security is a good thing at the device level, and it really provides protection for the device. What it doesn't do is give you any interoperable cybersecurity between the system or the supporting network, or give you a lifecycle management component. So it's a new development. UL cybersecurity standard is a new standard. It's been around for years, but in single digits. It's not a 10-year-old process. And as it matures to incorporate system level and lifecycle management, I think it'll be it could become a more important standard today, because it's just at the device level. It has limited effectiveness at creating a secure system, but it is definitely very good for the device. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Brian. We only have time for two more questions. So the first one I'll give you. The second one I'll give you a little prelude to, and that's going to be cost and difficulty, because we talked about a lot of complex things. So stand by for that one. So here's the short-term question, and then I'm going to come back with that final question that I want you guys to answer, and that is, holy cow, how much is this going to cost me, and how hard is it to do? So before we get to that, Brendan asked this question, why should IT departments trust the cloud services over keeping their systems on premise? And he's in the healthcare side of the business. And historically, as you know, cloud services make IT professionals cringe sometimes, is what he's saying. But we see, as you know, many customers moving their environments to the cloud, all different components of it. We see this in the financial sector and other places. So it's a great question. Really, is the cloud what we should be fearful of, or is it something else? And is there something common related here, whether it's in the cloud or not in the cloud, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. That's a really good question, and it's one that comes up very, very regularly. Wayne, Axis and the product partners that you work with, this is a common thing that we face on a regular basis, and that question of if and when there's going to be a transition to the cloud, and how secure is it, those kind of things. So, what would your response be to Brandon's question?
Well, I agree. I honestly, I never thought, the U.S. government would put stuff in a cloud. When cloud first started, I really thought that would never happen. But we see more and more of it. We use services every day, Exchange, Office 365, et cetera. I think, inherently, just understand at the end of the day, it's not on-prem, it's somebody else's computer. You're going to lose some of the things that you used to have on-prem. Understand, what those are. And, like we recently saw, probably vetting what privileged accounts, how are they used with that cloud provider. And other things that happen is, even once you get into a cloud environment, understanding ingress and outgress fees, understanding security controls. If you're a customer, you may say, well, we're going to protect a particular provider like Azure or AWS, but inevitably your business may need another connector into Google or something else. And managing security controls across multiple cloud platforms is increasingly complex. I agree. Move to the cloud if it makes sense, if it's solving a true business problem for you, but don't feel forced that, I'm just going to go to the cloud to go to the cloud.
Yeah. Well, one small supplement to that is that, Brandon, I think that two things happen. One is when systems transition to the cloud, there's an assumed level of security. Well, it's in the cloud, so it's secure. Well, actually, it's just a computer on the other side. It's just someone else's computer that you're connecting to. And the same security controls that you apply in your environment need to be applied in that environment. And if leveraged properly, the cloud is actually a great way to get additional security controls that you're just buying a fraction of the services from. And so it makes more security controls available to you. And if implemented properly, can deliver some good value in terms of security controls.
Yeah, great answer to the questions. In reality, a lot of benefit in the cloud, or as Wayne would say, you wouldn't see the U.S. government going to do this. And also a lot of security in the cloud if done properly, for the reasons Brian talked about, because the cloud environment, they absolutely have to make security number one thing that they worry about, and they do. So the final question, Brian, I'll let you answer it and use the last bit of time. We only have 2 minutes, so there'll be no summary after this. But here's the question. It comes from James in Washington, D.C. He said, basically, a lot of technology that you've talked about, a lot of things you've talked about, how expensive is this and how hard is it to do in a security system? Because, budgets are tight. We can leverage the IT system, but I'll just throw that question to you because in reality, what he's saying is, okay, we got the vision. Tell me about execution. If I have to go in my network and do this, what's it going to cost me in general terms, and how hard is it to do?
Well, that's a really great question.
And Brian, before you answer, since you're going to run the clock out on this one, thanks for everyone for joining us. But Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for everyone. The question is great. What we say is that there are multiple tiers that you can deploy, but we have created some structure and deployment of base level tier 1 cybersecurity services that are very inexpensive to implement and are applicable across the system to drive down risk by about 80% for single digit percentages of additional cost to the system. So less than 5% additional cost increase, we can, and sometimes far less than even half of that. We can put base level cybersecurity across that because it's just our specialist Convergence team very simply applying cybersecurity best practices to the systems. And then secondly, keeping it in that state. So that's the deployment state. We talked about there's two components, installation and lifecycle. From a lifecycle piece, you all already have software support agreements or should have software support agreements that keep your applications up to date or give you access to have them up to date. We recommend employing that capability, keeping that software up to date, and having a password rotation program that keeps your password refreshed on a regular basis to keep them secure. And again, very inexpensive. It's an incremental cost to your software support agreement. It's not exponential, and your local CTC delivers that and can price that for you and make that those costs available to you.
Well, Brian, Wayne, and Eric, thanks for joining us. And audience, thanks for joining us, especially, and for the questions that you gave us. Enjoy the rest of Insight. Like I said, you want to really hear from a top tier, super knowledgeable person about why this is important and why it's important in the security system. Tune in to listen to John N. Stewart, who talks as a keynote speaker on the 20th. In the meantime, everyone enjoy the rest of Insight. It's been great.